So what we'll do is it'll be 2 one-hour classes. We'll meet tonight for an hour, and then we'll meet in 2 weeks on Thursday for an hour, and really talk about what is mindfulness, some of the benefits of mindfulness. Also want to talk about how it works, and then I want to practice too. I'm really into practicing, so I'd like to maybe do a few, somewhere during tonight, maybe do about a 4-minute sit, and then maybe try to do another little longer one later. And then when you come back next time, we'll practice more, maybe a little bit longer. We'll just see how people are doing with that. So we'll do a little practice, and then talk about how to maybe create a practice in your own life. So I did give you all some handouts, and the first handout I want to look at is the handout that talks about what is mindfulness. And it has this, on the first page on the left has this diagram, which just kind of has a description in a nutshell, mindfulness, this here. So I'm going to be kind of using that as my visual, but I wanted to read this first, right behind that page it says, what is mindfulness? I don't know if everybody has, maybe people can share if they don't have a packet. Okay, I just found one more. Sure. Okay, so I want to talk about this definition. So maybe what we can do is, I wonder if people are willing to read a sentence. We can maybe just have different people read it. Just this first paragraph. Maybe we'll start this way. Judy, you want to? So maybe read one sentence. We'll just have people read it.
What is mindfulness? Mindfulness.
Oh yeah, loud. That's too loud. Yes.
Got the AC competing.
That's right.
There. Mindfulness is a way to pay attention without judgment to what is going on in each moment with a sense of curiosity and compassion. It is a state of being present in the here and now, being in the moment, being in your body, not being on autopilot. This sounds simple, but with all of the things competing for our attention, being still and quieting the mind, body, and spirit can seem almost impossible. Creating stillness, calmness, and peace within is an art to be cultivated, and the practice of mindfulness provides the mentoring and guidance to settle down.
Okay, good. So I'm going to stop there, and I want to go through that definition. I think it's really important because this is really what the basis of what we're going to be talking about. I think the first part of the definition that I like is this paying attention to the present moment with what they talk about, this awareness. Okay, so it's sort of paying attention, like being aware in the present moment with open curiosity. So you've got a little bit of curiosity about what you're experiencing. And this is a really tough one, non-judgment. So it doesn't mean no judgment, but just sort of being more aware that there is some judgment. So these are two aspects. So it's sort of this bringing your awareness, so bringing your attention to your awareness like being aware of what you're experiencing with open curiosity and non-judgment. Now, when you're doing it, you're going to be doing it moment by moment. So some people might think, oh, I'm just going to try to be aware of my breath for 20 minutes. Well, it doesn't work like that. It can happen, but what we want to think about is doing it moment by moment. And so often when we talk about mindful meditation, we're talking about sitting there in awareness, noticing the body, which may be the breath. And for some people, it may be different parts of the body, but the breath is a really good anchor. And also kind of noticing emotions, noticing thoughts, again with open curiosity, non-judgment, moment by moment. So you kind of see it's kind of like this is sort of the whole thing we're doing in a large chart, I guess. Does that make sense? Giving that sort of this open awareness. So I often talk about mindfulness as sort of a strategy to manage stress and anxiety, because if you think about some of these things, you might think, oh, look, I have anxiety, I have thoughts that then create some anxiety. So the idea here is noticing those thoughts, noticing those feelings as you're sitting in awareness with curiosity. So when let's say we decide to sit and we're just sort of noticing the breath. So we're following the breath. And then you may be like, what is that? I feel kind of anxious or worried. So you're kind of like, you notice some thoughts, some worries. You go back to the breath. And I said, I noticed there's a little bit of curiosity, and the mind kind of drifts off and it starts thinking about those worries. Let me just, with non-judgment, let me just bring the mind back to the breath. And that sort of brings me back to this awareness, and I'm doing it moment by moment. that's kind of an example of maybe what we might experience. So again, so mindfulness is really a great way to kind of manage whatever thoughts and feelings are arising, because we're talking about noticing them arise, feeling them, not following them, but sort of feeling them, then going back to, in mindful awareness, we will go back to the body or the breath. So it's really, this idea, this mindfulness idea is really natural. You all probably have experienced it before. Let's say if you're watching a movie and you're very engrossed in the movie, your mind may drift off a little bit, but it kind of comes back to the movie. Or reading a book. Lots of people are reading a book and they're really focused. When you notice that you read a whole page, you don't even know what you read, that's when you're not mindful, right? That's like, oh, I don't even know what happened there. Or let's say you're driving in your car and you don't even notice how you got home, you're just like in the driveway. That's like not being mindful. But if you're being mindful, you're really kind of focusing on the road, or you're focusing on the pages of the book and you're reading all the words and you're understanding the content. That's really being mindful. People often talk about being mindful when they do sports, because their mind's very engrossed. It's moment by moment. They're curious. They're noticing these things, but they're just sort of focused, and they have good concentration. That's sort of that mindfulness space that one gets into. And the definition of mindfulness is really this idea of, the word means return. So really it's return to the present. So when I talk about being mindful, that means you returning to the present moment. And the present moment can be anything, right? It can be you talking to a friend, so you return to the moment of listening. It could be you reading a book and losing your page. You return to the book and to that moment, trying to do it, and not saying to yourself, oh, darn, I drifted off for a whole page. That's sort of being judgmental of yourself. It's more like, oh, let me invite the mind to return back to this moment. So that's kind of how the definition of mindfulness came about, that idea of returning to the present moment. Any questions people have about something? Yes.
Who started mindfulness? Who started mindfulness, for those that didn't hear?
Good question. So the person who really brought this more to the attention of the West was John Kabat-Zinn, who did this program called MBSR, Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction. What was happening in a lot of the hospitals where people were complaining about having a lot of pain and anxiety and depression, and the doctors were like, we're not sure what we can do with this. So he created this, he took a lot of the studies from Buddhism, and he kind of turned it a little bit and put a Western flavor on it. So maybe talked about it in terms of the biology of the body and the stress response. So he kind of brought these ideas of mindfulness to the West, maybe in the late 70s, and he was a practicing Buddhist. So what we're teaching today is more secular mindfulness. It's just mindfulness. There's no traditions that we embrace like in this class, but there are Buddhists that may practice this too, and then this is more like secular mindfulness, just mindfulness without all that.
Who transferred it to the secular?
Mostly John Kabat-Zinn, and then
his last name was Zen.
Yeah,
Z-E-N-N.
Yeah. Maybe it was Z-I-N-N. Z-I-N-N. Yeah, John Kabat-Zinn. And also Joseph Goldstein and Jack Kornfield. These are people that have written a lot of books, and they practiced in the East, and they've come over and translated into more language that Westerners can pick up and understand. In this, what is mindfulness? There's a little bit of a description of. I talked a little bit about John Kabat-Zinn later if you want to read that. Any other questions? I think the other thing that's happened in the last 20 years, there's been a lot more research done on mindfulness. And so on that same page, halfway down, I put on some different stuff that the research has shown happens when people are practicing mindfulness. So maybe I can have, Anne, do you mind reading a couple of those? I'm going to go this way. Maybe just start from reduce stress.
Okay. Oh, about the research conducted.
Yeah, you can read that first line.
Research conducted over the past 25 years shows mindfulness training can do all of the following: reduce stress, improve immune functioning, enhance appreciation and gratitude, greater acceptance of self and others, improve positive decision making.
That's supposed to be calm the mind.
Calm the mind?
Yeah.
Okay. Improve focus and concentration, help manage physical and emotional pain, create inner peace and feelings of joy, reduce reactivity, and help us control our responses. Retrain your brain to think more positively. Decrease anxiety and depression. Improve disordered eating habits.
I mean, that's a long list of things that the research is showing has helped. And it's new research, so it's the last 25 years. And so we have research for 50, 70 years for a lot of other things, but this is more newer research. And another study that I heard, it's about people who have psoriasis on the skin. And what they did was, usually the way they treat that is people will go under like a tanning booth, and they'll get this UVB rays on them, and it will reduce the psoriasis on the skin. What they did is they had two groups. One group just did the tanning booth, right, for 3 months, and the other group did it, but they did mindfulness. They practiced mindfulness. So each week they came and they meditated and they sat there, or they were just being mindful during that 30 minutes. And they noticed that the people who had done the mindfulness, they healed 3 times faster. And I thought that was amazing. You know, that's really the immune system kicking in because they were being more present and doing, you know, some of the practices that we're going to talk about today and next time to help their immune system kick in so they could help fight disease, help other illnesses. So I think that to me was pretty positive. That's newer research. And then I also heard about a study with long-term meditators. These are people that were meditating for, 20, 30 years. And they talked about I don't remember the definition of the word. They talked about the cortical layers. So the cortical layers are these parts in your brain that, as you get older, they start to thin out. So it may be the connection between the prefrontal cortex to the amygdala. So the prefrontal cortex is part of your brain right here that does a lot of the thinking, like the judgment and compassion, caring, connections with people. That's the prefrontal cortex. And so the cortical layers that shoot from there and go to different parts of the brain, they tend to get, like I said, a little thinner. So they noticed that people who had meditated for many, many years, that those cortical layers were thicker, like they were stronger and thicker. And I don't think that they know exactly why that's happening, but they do realize that that's happening to people. So they did an MRI scan, and they noticed that this part of the brain was very lit up, those cortical layers got stronger. And as they noticed that this part of the brain got lit up, most of the time when we are out in the world and we're using this part of the brain, we use it, but when we become more mindful and we become more attentive to the present moment, the brain then will stimulate other areas of the brain. The prefrontal cortex will stimulate other parts of the brain that tend to be more reactive. So the amygdala in the back of the brain is more of your emotional part of your brain. So as you meditate and you strengthen this part, you light this part of your brain up more, it sends signals back to the amygdala to calm it down. So they've done MRI scans and noticed that people, after they meditate for a while, it could just be, some of the studies show 8 weeks of meditating each day, that this brain, the cortical layers get stronger, that the amygdala is calmed down a lot more, and the prefrontal cortex is more lit up. So I thought that was helpful because the amygdala really is your fight or flight part of the brain. That's the part that anxiety really gets strong. So when somebody sees something, the amygdala starts to send all these sensory inputs to all parts of the brain. Well, when the prefrontal cortex knows that, it sends signals back saying, you can calm down now, I know what's happening, and things will be fine. So as we strengthen the prefrontal cortex through mindfulness and meditation, then the amygdala also gets calmed down. And there's certain techniques you can use. I know one in particular that we'll talk about next time that does that. Specifically, that's its job, just to calm the amygdala down. So I think that was really helpful to learn that for me as I was managing my own anxiety. Any questions or comments? Okay.
I'm sorry to have
okay.
questions, but I couldn't help but wonder, like when we're, at least with me, I'm really concentrating on what you're saying. Am I practicing mindfulness by being very aware of what's happening, or do you have to have your eyes closed and be saying a word?
Right, good question. No, that is
because
mindfulness.
I'm really
right.
present in the moment.
That is mindfulness.
I'm trying to talk loud enough.
Right.
And listen to you, and I'm thinking, gee, I think I'm doing mindfulness. Every once in a while I take a breath.
Perfect. That is mindfulness. And one of the ways that you can always think of it like the way we practice mindfulness more intensely, is to close our eyes and follow the breath. So that would be kind of a practice to become more mindful? Well, we can be mindfulness at any moment like you are right now. You're really, all of you probably, you're really paying attention to my voice, you're listening, you're attentive, that's being mindful. You're not drifting off, you're not on your phone, I mean, you're really attentive to what's happening. So that's being mindful, that's a good point. So I think, that's why I think what's helpful is to think about mindfulness in terms of like a formal practice, which would be more of trying to sit and notice the mind, notice the breath and the body, and then an informal practice, which is what you're doing right now. Being attentive, using your concentration, using your awareness to be present right now, curiosity, judgment, noticing what's happening. Informal practice can also be mindfully eating. So as you're eating, you're really noticing what you're eating. I tend to, like, when I eat, like, my wife and I will make, this nice meal, and then we'll just go sit in front of the TV and we'll just be like, and it's gone in like 6 minutes, and I didn't even enjoy it. So one of the things that mindfulness would talk about would be to notice as I'm eating, notice the taste, the texture. That's mindfully eating. And you can do it when you're walking also. Let's say you're walking the dog, and the dog just pulls you around and you don't even notice anything. But mindfully walking would be sort of noticing the grass, noticing your steps, maybe even noticing the bottoms of your feet as they're taking each step. That's really mindfully walking. And that's sort of like these are more informal practices, whereas the formal would be trying to sit, which I think is a little more challenging, but the benefits are so immense doing the sitting because you become the grand observer of your mind and you will really notice this more than you will like when you're just kind of being mindful right now. I mean, you maybe know that this is happening, but when you sit, you really can become attentive to these things, and your mindfulness will increase in the sense that you'll get more concentration, more ability to focus. Another research study showed that they taught kids who had ADHD how to do mindfulness meditation, and they gave another group medication. And they noticed that after a year, the results were the same. Their ability to attend was who the kids who did mindfulness meditation was the same as the kids who took the medication. However, they said after a year, if the kids didn't keep practicing, the results diminished. They were going to sustain, whereas the medication, it just sort of sustains it, right? You just keep taking medication. So that was very promising, I thought, too, to kind of know that you could do meditation over medication, for who have, attention deficit or want to improve their concentration, too.
Did the group that did the medication not do the
meditation? Yeah, they just got medication, that's it. And the other group got meditation. Yeah. So that's some of the kind of current research that they're noticing. And then, this idea of mindfulness, too, is not about clearing your mind or stopping your mind from thinking. It's more about noticing the mind, noticing what's happening, being present to the experience that you're having. So as we think about meditating as a form of increasing our mindfulness, we're going to want to use the breath is really the best anchor. However, some people may have a difficult time following the breath. The breath may be too shallow, too deep, you can't find it. Some people might count and maybe count the breath. So you might go 1, 2, and just sort of count the breaths as a way to practice, mindfulness meditation is just counting the breaths or noticing the breath. So the breath is really kind of the anchor in mindfulness meditation. So you really want to use that. And then, as you sit there, you're going to notice that your mind will drift off. It just naturally does. So you want to just notice this drifting off and then invite it back to the breath. And I like to use that word invite because normally I'll be like, dang it, where did you go for, 3 minutes? What happened? And it will, because even now I'll sit and say I had to come here tonight, and I was sitting this morning and my mind was just like, I wonder what's going to happen tonight, how many people are going to come, I wonder if the library advertised too much, there's going to be too many people, all that is going in my head, right? And then I'm like, oh, everything's okay, and then I went back. So I was probably gone, I don't always go away that long, but I was probably gone for like a minute, but it's not a matter of time. I could go for 30 minutes and just be off on my own little work planning. And then I just was like, oh, there it is. And then I just brought my mind back to the breath. Now, saying that I've been doing it for a long time, I think originally when I started, I would be like, dang it, it's gone. So now I'm really, the last probably 4 or 5 years, I've been much more, kinder to myself. So I use that word invite. So invite the breath, invite the mind back to the breath. And so maybe I'll say that to myself. Well, why don't you come back, come back, come back. And the more you do it, even we'll just do it for a few minutes, in a couple minutes, you may notice that you have lots of thoughts and feelings, so you want to just notice the thoughts, notice the feelings, you want it moment by moment, maybe curious, go back to the breath. And then you sit just, you may just sit there for a second, you may not even sit there at all, your mind just may drift right off of you. Then you just notice, I was thinking about how hungry I am. Let me go back to the breath. I wonder what I'm going to do tonight. I wonder if my husband's going to be home when I get home. If he was just made dinner, I'd be so much happier. My life would be the best if I just, that's what it is. So the more you practice it, the more when you're outside in the world, you'll start to practice it too. And you'll just be like driving, and you'll be like, oh, I was thinking about my daughter, that dentist appointment. Let me go back to using my hands on the steering wheel or listening to some music and going back to the moment. In fact, even tonight, after we've talked about all this stuff, you're probably all going to have a little more mindfulness as you spend the next, few hours outside of this class. So is everybody up for maybe doing a little, maybe we'll do a little few minute sit? I want to kind of turn the light down just a little bit, just because it's tense. What we'll do is I'll guide you through it, so I'll be talking to you. You can listen to my voice, and then maybe some little pauses, and then if that happens, you're just going to follow your breath. So maybe your attention may be on my voice, or maybe on your breath. You may block out my voice and just follow your own breath. So you can do either or you can count too. So some people might count. So there's lots of different ways to do it. So a lot of times I'll talk to people about kind of sitting with your feet flat on the floor. You want to try to keep your back as straight as you can. And ideally, this doesn't work for me, but you want your knees lower than your hips. So for these chairs, it's not that good. So when you do find a place at home, this is a good idea. You kind of sit forward too. And then, I know you should sit forward, then your knees might be lower. What that does is it kind of arches your back a little bit, and it gets a natural curve in your lower back. And you kind of want that little curve, because that's, according to research, that's the pose that allows your mind and your body to be most settled and most relaxed for the longest period of time. So you want that little tiny curve. You might be able to get it through sitting with your rear end really into the chair. I can feel it now. I can get a little curve in my back, and kind of your shoulders back, and then put your hands maybe here, or you can do it like this. And you want your elbows to kind of align with your shoulder, because you'll notice if you have them out here too far, you'll start to lean forward, and after a few minutes, you'll be like, you might not nod, but you'll be kind of forward. So you kind of want to try to keep it back a little bit like this, and then try to keep your head up. And then either you could close your eyes, or you can just cast your gaze. If you're not comfortable closing your eyes, you can just sort of cast your gaze down in front of you. So whatever you feel most comfortable with. And maybe we'll do about 4 minutes and see how that goes. See what people's experiences with that.
Should we keep repeating a word or something?
No, just listen to my voice.
Oh,
well, let's do that.
You're going to be talking.
I'll talk. Listen to my voice. And if your mind drifts off, then you kind of notice that, and then go back to the breath, or go back to my voice. So either one. And I'm going to read just read kind of a mindfulness script.